Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for your supporting. Let's begin.
I'd like to request our flight attendants be seated at this time. We're landing in about 1 minute. Thank you.
On December 29, 1972, at 8:30 p.m., the public address system at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York announced that Western Airlines Flight 401 was ready for takeoff. About half an hour later, all 176 passengers, including 13 crew members, had boarded. Flight 401 was a new type of aircraft called the Lockheed 101 TriStar, a very expensive, technologically advanced, and very large plane capable of carrying 400 passengers. Instead of 4 seats per row, like regular airplanes, each row had 1. The plane also had 2 decks, the main deck for passengers and the lower deck for the crew, accessible via 2 small elevators located at the rear of the aircraft. The lower deck housed a galley and a food and beverage preparation area, as well as a lounge area for the crew. This flight was piloted by Captain Bob Loft. He's 55 years old and has 30,000 hours of flying experience. Bob was known for his exceptional work ethic, self-confidence, and composure in emergencies. If you're ever going to fly, this is the pilot you'd want to fly with. Bob boarded the cockpit and went up to the front of the plane, taking the pilot's seat. The seat was located in the front left of the cockpit. After he sat down, the first officer, Bert Stockstill, entered and sat in the seat to the pilot's right. Then the rest of the cockpit crew entered. Normally, regular planes only have 2 seats in the cockpit, but this plane, being very large, had 4. One of the 2 remaining was Don Rebo, a 51-year-old aeronautical engineer, a tall, broad-shouldered but calm man. He entered and sat in the seat behind the first officer. A little while later, the last member of the cockpit crew entered, Angelo Donata. He wasn't part of the flight crew that night. He was a regular employee of Eastern Airlines, so the company placed him in the 4th seat in the cockpit. At 9:10 p.m., all the pre-flight checks were completed, and all the passengers and crew were in their seats. Captain Bob began taxiing the plane towards the runway. 10 minutes later, the plane took off and was flying. It was almost midnight. The plane was in the sky, heading from New York to Miami for 2 hours. The flight was so ordinary that one of the passengers, named Jerry Asco, was sitting, writing a letter, thanking Eastern Airlines for the beautiful flight and the excellent plane they were flying on. His intention was to send this letter to the company as soon as they got off the plane. But at 11:32 p.m., 2 hours and 1 minute after takeoff, the flight, which had been completely routine until now, was anything but. As Captain Bob approached Miami International Airport, he began to lower the landing gear. But the co-pilot noticed something strange. The aircraft in question had 3 landing gears, 1 under the right wing, 1 under the left wing, and 1 under the nose of the plane. Each wheel had a light in the cockpit that illuminated when the wheel was deployed and ready for landing. However, when Captain Bob lowered the gears, Bert noticed that only two lights were lit. The light for the wheel at the front of the plane remained off. At that point, the captain and the men with him in the cockpit said the problem must be with the light. It couldn't possibly be with the wheel itself. The plane was brand new and had been thoroughly inspected before takeoff, so the problem certainly wasn't the wheel. But just to be safe, the captain, while en route to the airport, raised and lowered the gears once. A second later, hoping the light would come on this time, but when the landing gear retracted, the same thing happened again. The two tail lights illuminated, but the nose wheel light remained off. At that point, they started to feel a bit anxious. Was the plane ready to land or not? So Captain Bob calmly contacted Miami Air Traffic Control and told them he couldn't confirm if the nose wheel was deployed and needed to circle the area. Air Traffic Control instructed him to fly over the Everglades. The Everglades are a large wetland area in Florida. Captain Bob took the plane there, away from the air routes, until he resolved the issue. He took Flight 401 to the Everglades and positioned the plane to circle in a closed loop. There, the captain and co-pilot engaged the autopilot to maintain a constant altitude, 600 meters above sea level, and a constant speed of 320 kilometers per hour. After the plane entered autopilot, they started investigating the problem with the light. They tried tapping on it, turning it, removing it, blowing on it, and reinstalling it, hoping it would work. The problem must have been with the light. However, one time while trying to reinstall it, the light got stuck and wouldn't come off. So they needed to find another way to confirm whether the landing gear had deployed. The captain turned to Don Rebo, the flight engineer, sitting behind the co-pilot, and asked him to go down to the hellhole to check for himself whether the landing gear had deployed. The hellhole is a narrow space located under the cockpit, accessible through a small door in the floor. It's extremely uncomfortable and hot, but it allows them to inspect certain parts of the aircraft that are otherwise invisible. There's a window at the bottom of the hole through which they can see the landing gear. Whether he went down or not, Don Rebo agreed, got up from his chair, opened the hole, and went down to see for himself. At the same time our friends were going through this crisis, on the ground in the same place, there was a man named Robert Marquez, 43 years old, searching the Everglades with a friend for frogs. The two of them were riding in Robert's hovercraft, a flat-bottomed boat with a large propeller at the back that pushes it forward. This type of boat is very famous in the Everglades area. Robert and his friend were surrounded by darkness from every direction. There were no people or buildings in sight for kilometers around. The only source of light they had was a flashlight Robert wore on his head, while the two of them were searching in the darkness for the frogs. Robert saw a very bright yellow flash coming from about 8 kilometers away. Despite its intensity, the flash disappeared immediately afterward. He asked his friend if he had seen the wade, but his friend said he hadn't. Robert then said, "Let's go to the Wade's location to find out what happened." Robert took his friend, the boat, and the plane to the Wade's location. After about 15 minutes, they arrived. Robert and his friend couldn't believe what they were seeing. About a third of an hour before these events, up in Flight 401, when the pilot turned to tell Don Rebo to go down to the hellhole and check the wheel, it's believed the pilot accidentally hit the steering wheel with his foot. Apparently, this slight impact was enough to disconnect the autopilot and restore human control. However, since no one was controlling the plane at that time, it began a gradual descent. As the plane began its descent, no one noticed. The first reason was the darkness of the area. The Everglades, as we mentioned, has no buildings, so there was no light to help them see if the plane was descending or not. Furthermore, there was no air traffic in the area, so they couldn't see if a plane was passing by and determine their altitude. The second reason was that the descent was very gradual, which prevented them from feeling any change in gravity that would have given them the sensation of the plane descending. The third, and most important, reason was that the men in the cockpit were all very focused on the light, which is why the plane continued to descend gradually. No one on board realized they were in an emergency until the crucial moment when the plane crashed into the ground in the Everglades. Robert and his friend were the first to arrive at the crash site. Although they could hear people screaming and crying everywhere, they couldn't see anything at all. The fire caused by the explosion was quickly extinguished. Because the Everglades are a wetland with water everywhere, and because the plane was descending at a gradual angle, not a sharp one, this lessened the impact. The muddy terrain of the Everglades also reduced the force of the impact with the ground, and these factors helped save many lives. Dozens of passengers survived the initial impact of the plane crash, but unfortunately, many of them were severely injured or trapped inside the wreckage, or both. When Robert and his friend arrived at the scene, Robert began searching everywhere with the small flashlight on his head, hoping to find someone. He started seeing bodies everywhere, but while searching, he saw the first survivor, a man whose clothes were all burned as a result of the explosion, trapped in his seat on the plane. It seemed that when the plane exploded, the seat fell into the mud, burying part of the man underground, to the point that half of his face was underwater. As soon as Robert shone the light on the man's face, the man immediately began calling for help. Robert and his friend jumped onto the man, pulled him out of the water, and saved his life. But as soon as they got the man out of the water, they began hearing the screams and cries for help from the other people all around them. The two of them did everything they could that night. This was to save as many people as possible. But unfortunately, there were many people in need of rescue, and there wasn't enough time. About half an hour after Robert and his friend arrived at the scene, the Coast Guard finally arrived by helicopter. They all spent the entire night trying to save as many people as possible, and by daybreak, there was no one left to save. The toll was 99 dead and 77 survivors. Among the dead were Captain Bob Loft, First Officer Bert Stockstill, and Engineer Don Rebo. Angelo Dunedin, the fourth man who was with them in the cabin, also survived. Even Jerry Esco, the man who was writing a letter about how beautiful, pleasant, and smooth the trip was, survived. The subsequent investigations to determine the cause of the accident confirmed that human error was the cause. Even more tragically, the investigations confirmed that the wheel was descending normally. And it was only the light bulb that had burned out. After the conclusion of the investigation, the company, Eastern Airlines, did everything it could to try to compensate the survivors and the families of those who died, and also made many changes to the pilot and co-pilot training program to ensure that this disaster would not happen again. But this was not the end. The story of Flight 401 unfolded over 3 years following the crash. Hundreds of employees at Eastern Airlines began experiencing strange occurrences. When employees approached their superiors to report these incidents, it was clear the company wanted to suppress the matter and avoid any controversy or discussion about the crash. Any employee who submitted a report they didn't like was either sent to a psychiatrist or fired. Despite the intense pressure the company exerted on its employees, some secretly approached journalists and told them everything that was happening. In March 1973, just 3 months after the plane crashed into the Everglades, an Eastern Airlines flight attendant named Jenny was assigned to Flight 318 from New York to Florida. She was accompanied by a crew of flight attendants, including her friend Denise. Flight 318 was on the same aircraft as Flight 1011, the model of the plane from Flight 401, and not only that, but it had a spare part that came out of the plane that crashed when the accident happened. After the investigations concluded, the researchers discovered that many spare parts from the plane were still intact and in excellent condition. Therefore, after they were examined and the company confirmed that they were working efficiently, the company began installing them as spare parts in its fleet of the same model. Since these spare parts were not related to the plane crash and were far removed from the error that occurred, no one objected to the company installing these spare parts in other planes. Anyway, Flight 318 took off with Jenny, Denise, and another group of flight attendants on board. After takeoff, the flight attendants began distributing food and drinks to the 200 passengers on the plane. The way they divided the work was that some flight attendants would be on the main deck above, taking orders from the passengers, and the other part would be on the lower deck, preparing food and drinks for the passengers. After Denise finished taking all the orders from the passengers, she decided to go down to the lower deck to check on Jenny and help her if she needed anything. But what happened was that when Denise got in the elevator to bring Jenny down, she had finished everything she needed to do downstairs and decided to go up to see if Denise needed anything. What happened was that one was going down in one elevator and the other was going up in the other at the same time, so they didn't see each other. When Jenny reached the upper floor, she got out of the elevator and started asking the people working with her where Denise was. Everyone kept telling her that Denise had just left a minute ago and was going to see if she needed anything to help her. So after a few minutes, Jenny went back into the elevator to go down to the lower floor and see Denise. To get a sense of the story I'm about to tell, you first need to know what the lower floor looks like. When you go down in either elevator and the door opens on the lower floor, you'll find yourself in a long corridor, as long as an airplane. When you get out of the elevator, you're in the middle of the kitchen. It's a narrow kitchen divided into two sections. On the left, there's a row of ovens lined up next to each other. And on the right, there's a row of cabinets and storage units. At the end, there's a wall with a door on the right. This wall is what separates them. The kitchen area is separate from the break room, where the staff sits after finishing their work. Because the door to the break room is on the side, not in the middle, you can't see it clearly from the kitchen. You have to go to the door and look through it. The break room itself consisted of a few sofas and chairs, arranged in a circle. Anyway, when Jenny took the elevator and went down to look for Denise, she got off on the lower floor, but didn't find him. The kitchen was empty and the break room door was closed. But as soon as Jenny got down, she had a feeling someone was with her, maybe in the break room, which she couldn't see because the door was closed. Since Jenny was sure someone was with her, and that someone was definitely Denise, she didn't call out to her or go to check if she was really there. She started preparing food for the people upstairs, and while she was preparing the food, she kept glancing at the door to the rest area, hoping that Denise might emerge from it at any moment. Since Jenny was sure someone was with her, and that someone was definitely Denise, she didn't call out to her or go to check if she was really there. She started preparing food for the people upstairs, and while she was preparing the food, she kept glancing at the door to the rest area, hoping that Denise might emerge from it at any moment. But after a while, no one came out, and Jenny started thinking to herself, if someone was inside, they would have come out to see who was working outside and making a noise. But as we said, Jenny had a strong feeling that someone was with her. It was a feeling that would put anyone in their place if they were really with someone. So then, Jenny started to think, could Denise be playing a trick on me, hiding in one of the closets or in the break room? As Jenny started thinking this way, she began to get more and more nervous. All the while she was preparing the food, she kept looking around. But after a while, still no one came out. No one left the break room. No one jumped out of any closet to scare her. Jenny was completely alone. But at the same time, with every passing minute, Her feeling that someone was with her grew stronger, and she became more and more nervous, to the point that she couldn't continue preparing the food. In fact, she started to wish that Denise would actually come out and scare her, just to reassure herself that nothing strange was happening. But when Denise didn't do that, Jenny's heart sank. Jenny started walking slowly towards the door that led to the lounge area, and the closer she got, the faster her heart beat. When she reached it, she grasped the doorknob, turned it, and it opened under the door. She stuck her head in to see who was inside, but she didn't find anyone. But the moment she put her head in, the feeling that something was next to her increased significantly, to the point that all the hair on her body stood on end. So she ran to the lounge area and searched every corner and every place, hoping to find someone trying to play a prank on her. But after searching everywhere, she still didn't find anyone. Jenny turned around, terrified, and all that was going through her mind now was that she was at the far end of the lounge area, and to get out, she would have to cross the entire lounge and pass through the kitchen to reach the elevator. That's when Jenny started to move. She moved slowly towards the door leading to the kitchen, and the closer she got, the more and more of the kitchen became visible. She hoped to find someone working outside. The feeling that someone was with her kept growing stronger and wouldn't subside. But when she reached the door and looked through the entire kitchen, she found it completely empty. At that moment, Jenny ran hysterically to the elevator and kept pressing the button, terrified, all the while waiting for the elevator to descend. She kept looking around frantically. Finally, the door opened, and Jenny rushed inside, continuing to press the button frantically until it closed. When Jenny reached the upper floor, she ran out the door and bumped into Mildred, the flight attendant, who was standing in front of the elevator door to get off. After they both regained their balance, they looked at each other, and it was clear that something was wrong with Jenny. She was pale, sweating, and panting. Mildred asked her, "Jenny, what's wrong? What's happening?" Jenny replied, "I don't know. I can't tell you what's happening. I don't know." Mildred then said, "Come with me." Jenny followed her, and they went to a place at the back of the plane, away from the passengers' eyes. To everyone's surprise, Jenny found Denise. There, Denise looked exactly like Jenny, sweating, trembling, and pale. It turned out that when Jenny left the lower floor the first time to look for Denise, Denise was coming down at the same time. During the few minutes Denise spent downstairs, the same thing happened to her as to Jenny. Denise said, "When I went down to the kitchen, I didn't find anyone, but at the same time, I felt like someone was next to me the whole time. When I went and opened the door to the lounge, I found it empty, so I got scared, closed it, and ran straight upstairs." What happened was that while Denise was going up, Jenny was coming down the second time, which is why she didn't see her the second time either. The two friends, who had never experienced anything so strange before, went through the same experience in almost the exact same place, just a few minutes apart. A month later, the 318 flight that Jenny and Denise were on was departing from Newark Airport in New Jersey. I was flying to Miami. And after most of the pre-flight checks were completed, the airport allowed passengers to board the plane. After the passengers took their seats, the flight attendant, Cece, started counting the passengers to see if everyone had arrived. What happened was that when Cece started counting the people, she discovered a mistake. There was one extra person. So she decided to start the count again. But when she started counting from the beginning, she realized the reason. She noticed that there was a captain in uniform sitting in one of the seats. At that moment, she thought, "Oh, he must be a pilot from Eastern Airlines going to the airport we're flying to, because he has work there." In the 1970s, it was common that when employees wanted to take a plane to another airport, they would not say, "Take a shot from the plane," unless they were still on the plane. In fact, the topic meant that there was more love than it is now. So Sis thought that this must be what the pilot did. And because of this, it was not counted with her in the list in her hand. So the next step was that she would go to ask him about his name, so that she could write it down. And she actually went to him, greeted him, and recognized him. She started to ask him his name in order to write him down. What happened was that the man kept walking in front of him and did not look at Cess and did not respond to her, nor did he even hear her, even though she was standing right next to him and speaking in a clear voice, and there was no one else talking at all. Cess waited a while and then returned the question a second time. And for the second time, the man did not cross her at this moment. A second flight attendant named Diane saw what was happening and went to help Cess. She went and stood next to the man and tried to get his attention, but for the third time, the man did not, he responded to them, sitting and staring in front of him as if he did not hear anyone. Diane and Sis started to look at each other, confused as to what they were going to do. Then Sis said, "Look, I will go tell the pilot how he is behaving." Sis actually went to the pilot's cabin and said to him, "The matter is the same." 3. The pilot, George, who was in charge of this flight, went out with her to see why this strange man was not responding, and while George and Sis were leaving. To this man, one of the passengers noticed that something strange was happening. 6 of the passengers turned around from their chair to watch and see what was happening. George Wess reached the man next to him, Diane, and approached him to inquire of him about the matter. The man, until now, had not seen anyone seeing his face well, because he was sitting and wearing a large hat and a bus in front of him. So George approached him and got down on his knee to talk to him. But as soon as he approached him, he returned to Laura and threw himself on the ground and said, "Oh my God, this is Bob. Bob Loft, the pilot who died on Flight 401, was known to George very well. It was impossible for him to mistake Loft for someone else. But before George, any of the flight attendants or any of the passengers could do anything, the man vanished right before their eyes. Immediately, the passengers began screaming. Sterry, George, Diane, and Cece, who were already terrified, understood that they were responsible for the flight and its security. So they tried to calm everyone down. After the plane calmed down a bit, they began searching every inch of it. Surely, no one disappears into thin air. This man must have run past us without us noticing, and he must be somewhere on the plane. For over an hour, the passengers were told to remain in their seats until the situation was resolved. The search for the missing man began in every corner of the plane, but to no avail. After a long delay, Flight 318 finally took off. Miami arrived, and as soon as they arrived, they went straight to the company and submitted a report about what they had seen. But the strange thing is that Eastern Airlines itself did nothing. In fact, the reports disappeared after a week. When employees went to ask management about these reports, management denied that these people had ever written any reports. They said no reports had been written by George, Cece, or Diane. But George, Diane, and Cece themselves said they had written the report. In fact, some pilots in the company said they had seen these reports with their own eyes before they disappeared. Over the course of 2 years, a large number of inexplicable incidents occurred on Eastern Airlines planes. But what's astonishing is that these strange incidents only happened on planes that had spare parts from Flight 401. One of the things that happened more than once was the appearance of the silent captain who resembled Bob Loft. On one occasion, one of the managers at Eastern Airlines saw him, and he disappeared right before his eyes. The manager became very agitated, got off the plane, and ordered the entire plane to be searched. But of course, they didn't find anything. And on another occasion, a second time, one of the workers loading food onto the plane saw someone walking on the lower deck. The man resembled Don Rebo, the flight engineer on Flight 401. When the worker approached him, the man turned and disappeared. The catering company panicked and refused to work on the plane, delaying the takeoff for a considerable amount of time. Another incident occurred when the pilot and co-pilot of Flight 318 heard a thumping sound coming from a sinkhole while they were in the cockpit. The pilot got up, grabbed a flashlight, opened the hatch, and went down to investigate, thinking there might be a problem with the plane. However, when he went down and started searching with the flashlight, he found nothing. But on his way back, he saw Don Rebo standing there. What happened was that when he got off and started looking with his flashlight, he didn't find anything at all. But on his way back, he saw Don Rebo standing in the cabin, looking at him, and then he disappeared right in front of him. On another flight, there was a regular passenger sitting in economy class. She was sitting quietly the whole flight, completely normal. But suddenly, without any warning, she started screaming hysterically. When they went to her to ask what was wrong, she pointed to the seat next to her and told them that a man had suddenly appeared in the seat. And when she screamed, he disappeared right in front of her. This woman kept screaming hysterically to the point that they had to tie her to the seat until they reached their destination airport. All of these strange events happened in 1974. It all disappeared suddenly. Although Eastern Airlines told the world they didn't believe in the haunted planes, they took all 1,011 planes into maintenance that year and removed all the spare parts related to Flight 401, even though those parts weren't faulty at all. They were removing perfectly good parts without any explanation. What happened was that when the company did that, all the strange incidents disappeared. And that's the end of today's story. I'm waiting for your opinions in the comments. If you have any suggestions for improving the video, please write them down. And if there's a specific story you'd like me to tell, please write it in the comments too. And the most important thing, Jeng.